So welcome, everybody. Why don't we get started? My name is Tom Banchoff. I see some familiar faces here. I'm director of the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs here at Georgetown. I'm delighted to welcome back to the center Fenggang Yang, an old friend and colleague who's spoken here before and is going to share some thoughts today on the very important and interesting topic, why Christianity is thriving in China today. Those of you who know the center and our work know that this is one of our main areas of interest, religion in China. We have a postdoctoral fellowship program now in its fourth year where we bring a very talented young scholar of religious studies from a Chinese institution to Georgetown for a year. Dr. Liu is here with us this year from Shanghai. We have a website that we're building out with resources on religion in China and the United States in both English and Chinese that we hope will become a very important teaching tool at universities and even at the secondary school level, both in China and in the US, to build knowledge in both societies about our societies and about some of the differences and challenges that we face. And we've had a running dialogue now for 3 years with the State Administration for Religious Affairs in China, alternating meetings here at Georgetown and in Beijing to discuss some of the key issues in our bilateral relationship in a spirit of openness, and those have been very productive exchanges. There's probably no scholar in the world better positioned to address these issues than Fenggang Yang. He's known to you, I think, as a professor of sociology and as director of the Center on Religion and Chinese Society at Purdue. He's a leading scholar of religion in China, but also works on immigrant religion in the United States. I'll just list a couple of his more recent books: State, Market, and Religions in Chinese Societies, which he co-edited in 2005, and his book forthcoming with Oxford University Press. It's not out yet, is it?
No,
not
yet.
quite. Entitled Religion in China, Survival and Revival Under Communism, which hints at the topic of his presentation today. Part of the real impact and influence of Fenggang over the years has been in organizing a summer institute for the social scientific study of religion in China that brings together scholars from within Chinese institutions, and particularly young scholars, brings them together with scholars of religion from around the world, and it's been a tremendous instrument for deepening knowledge and strengthening the disciplines around these questions in China over the past several years. My colleague Jose Casanova, who many of you know, was a guest at the Institute last summer and gave a series of lectures there, and we look forward to further collaborations with Fenggang and his institute and his activities into the future. There's some seats right up here and alongside to my left. So with that, please join me in welcoming Fenggang Yang. And please turn off your cell phones. I've been told that it can interfere with the sound.
I'll do that first. Yeah, thank you, Tom, for this nice introduction. And I'm very glad to be back to see old friends here. Yeah, actually, I consider this area as my second hometown because I lived in the area for more than 8 years before I moved around in the US. Yeah, actually today's topic is not the book that's forthcoming. That the book is coming out perhaps later this year. It's more general overview of religion under communist rule. This topic actually perhaps is my next book project. And so I want to share some of the ideas to get your feedback so that I know how to write this book. And I do have another book that's coming out next month from Brill. That's called The Social Scientific Studies of Religion in China. It's an edited volume. Then another volume also from Brill It's called Confucianism and the Spiritual Traditions in China, edited volume. That's hopefully coming out later this year. And Dr. Liu Yi has a chapter in it on Confucianism and Christianity in the early Republic period. So should be interesting book. Yeah, today the topic is why Christianity is thriving in China today. Let's see which way is the easiest. Okay, Christianity in China today is really a big story, or getting bigger and bigger. So recently, Tony Blair said this. China is a fascinating story. There are more Muslims than the whole of Europe. There are more practicing Protestants than in Britain. And there are more practicing Catholics than in Italy. And also there are 100 million Buddhists. And China, when you think about that, many people tend to think China as homogeneous. But in terms of religion, it's perhaps as diverse as that in the US. And actually, Tony Blair is only one of the latest, made one of the latest comments on Christianity and other religions in China. Just a few years ago, 8 years ago, a historian first said this. This is by Daniel Bass. He said, today, on any given Sunday, there are almost certainly more Protestants in church in China than in all of Europe, not just the UK, but all of the Europe. And then, about 5 years ago, a journalist, the former Beijing bureau chief of Time magazine, David Aikman, he said, he published the book. The title says that, Jesus in Beijing, How Christianity is Transforming China and Changing the Global Balance of Power. That makes it interesting. Then, just a few months ago, The Guardian in the UK made this titled story, that's China, the Future of Christianity. And the subtitle said, with the state now actively financing Christianity, China could well become the largest Christian country in the world. Quite sensational. But one thing, it clearly shows a European perspective. For religion to grow, you have to get the state support. But that's actually not true in China. Christianity has been growing in China despite government restrictions and the suppression. So it's not because of the backing of the government. So that's what I try to explain. I'll skip the historical development of Christianity in China. Actually, there's archaeological evidence shows that Christianity could have arrived in China in the 1st century. But there are some historians and archaeologists are working on this. I'll just skip all of this, fast forward to today. Christianity in the People's Republic of China. That's beginning in 1949. Actually, there are 4 clearly different phases of development. Between 1949 and 1966, I think one word to capture the relationship between the Christian church and the state is suppression. And then followed by eradication, or elimination completely from society during the so-called Cultural Revolution and also a few years after that. That's between 1966 and 1979. Then, since 1979, churches were restored, but really there are a lot of restrictions. I'll go over this quickly. immediately after the establishment of the People's Republic, missionaries were driven out or forced out of China. It only took 2 or 3 years before all the foreign missionaries, Catholic and Protestant missionaries, left, with very few who remained in China in prison. And for the Chinese Christians, they were organized into the so-called Three Self-Patriotic Movement Committee. That's the Three Self churches. And the Catholic also were organized into the Patriotic Catholic Association. They reached completed this work of organizing into the patriotic associations by 1957. And immediately as the work finished of organizing religious believers into national associations, the Protestants were further reformed. That in around 1957, you could be a Christian, Protestant, but you could not be a Baptist, a Methodist, or Episcopalian. The denominations were disbanded and banned around 1957-58. And actually, I skipped the development of Christianity in the early 20th century, like in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. There were Chinese Christian movement, some sectarian groups, really independent of Western missions. They developed. And those groups now, they could not maintain their sectarian churches. They have to be part of the national association, the patriotic associations. And when the denominations were disbanded, that's perhaps the beginning of the so-called house churches that you hear a lot in the media now. They do not go to the churches anymore. They stay home, but they did not stop worshiping, did not stop gathering. So that's based on the oral history interviews in the last few years, we really learned house church movements really took off, started in around 1957-58. Then 1966, when the Cultural Revolution started, the Red Guard, not the party or the state, not the government, but the Red Guards went all over China, closed down all religious sites, not only Christian churches, but Buddhist temples, Taoist temples, Islamic mosques were all closed down. So beginning in 1966 until 1979, officially there was no religion in China. No religious practice existed in society openly. With the exception when Richard Nixon visited China in the early 1970s, when the U.S.-China began to reestablish relationship, and there was a church open in Beijing, but only for diplomats, not for the Chinese. So actually, George Bush, the senior, attended that church, and his daughter was baptized in Beijing during the Cultural Revolution. So need to be careful about making the sweeping statement. There was that exception. But actually, when there was no church open officially, that's when Christianity began to grow rapidly underground. In the last 10 years, I have been going to China, visiting different places, collecting stories, interviewing people. I heard so many stories about how miraculously Christianity grew during the Cultural Revolution. even during the violent clash of the early years of the Cultural Revolution, when the two sides or multiple sides fighting with each other, Christianity growing quietly but fast during that time. So by the end of the 1970, by the end of the Cultural Revolution, in 1979, churches were allowed to reopen, churches, temples were allowed to reopen. And then in 1982, the Chinese Communist Party issued a document that basically restored the religious freedom. And in that document, that's called document number 19 of 1982, admitted that there were 3 million Protestants and about 3 million Catholics. That means the Protestants had grown from less than 1 million before the Cultural Revolution to 3 million after the Cultural Revolution. It tripled during that time. And the Catholics held the ground. There were 3 million. Yeah, I might have been messing up with the numbers. Okay, there were less than 1 million Protestants before the Cultural Revolution. Then there were 3 million after the Cultural Revolution. Then there were 3 million Catholics before the Cultural Revolution and 3 million after the Cultural Revolution. So they stayed the same. Then between 1979 and 1995, that period I would call that the authorities' strategy is to control, to weaken religion, because suddenly they realized that you cannot eliminate religion, cannot eradicate religion within a short time and in the foreseeable future. So they changed the strategy because now the central task is economic development in order to rally people of different worldviews to this central task of economic development. So religious freedom, religion became tolerated, but still did not like to see religion become a major social factor. Then after 1989, a remarkable year, maybe a watershed in the development of Christianity, I will explain later. And then by the mid-1990s, that control to weaken Christianity apparently failed, because Christianity growing very fast, especially in the rural areas in the 1980s and the early 1990s. And so the new strategy, the new policy is try the best to contain the further growth of Christianity, especially Protestantism. Oops. So the new policy is really marked as this anti-infiltration, because the government really feared that foreign forces are using Christianity to subvert the political system. And is just now let me move to the next one. I want to leave some time for discussion, so I don't want to go too detailed. And in 2007, we managed to do a survey of religion in China. We did a survey that included over 7,000 respondents. It's a national representative survey sample. And this perhaps is the best survey so far on religion. Based on that survey, we estimate the number of Christians. Actually, it's about 33.5 million, including Protestants and Catholics. For those who know about it, you know this is quite a low number, because in the media in the West, you may have heard much higher numbers. Right before the Olympic Games in 2008, and the Christianity Today, the evangelical Christian magazine, reported that there were 130 million Christians in China. And that reportedly leaked information by the former director of the State Administration of Religious Affairs, Ye Xiaowen. That's the highest number I have seen, but that's really quite a lot. Based on our survey, only 33.5 million people who could have admitted that they are Christian. This is identity, self-identity. And we had a lot of other questions, like about practice, about beliefs. So there are some people who may not identify themselves as Christians, but they nevertheless acknowledge that they believe in the existence of Jesus Christ. Well, this could mean, a historical person like Napoleon existed. But we asked the question in a set of questions along with other supernatural beings, like Yu Huang Da Di, that's the Chinese traditional God, supreme God, and the Buddha, Dharma, that kind of set of supernatural existence. And there are more people admit that they do believe in that. And also, interestingly, there are people who may not believe, may not identify, but nevertheless they have practiced. They said prayers to Jesus Christ, said prayers to Mary, or attended church, or have a cross at home or wear as their necklace. So there are Christian symbols at their office, home, or with them personally. So these three would add up to about 74 million, 74.5 million people. Personally, I think if our survey is reliable at all, this may be the higher estimate. And the 33.5 is the lower end of the estimate. That's perhaps more realistic. Of course, there are still a few more other people who claim to believe in Shangdi. Shangdi, even though this is a term has been in China for a long time, 5,000 years, 4,000 years. But in China today, most people would associate Shangdi with Christianity, especially the Protestant version. In the Catholic version, it's a Tianzhu. But Shangdi could be means Christian, but some other Chinese religions also believe in this Shangdi, the supreme God. So this is the number. Even if we take the lowest estimate as 33.5 million, compared with 1949, that's still a dramatic increase from less than 4 million, 3 million Catholics stayed all along, and there was less than 1 million Protestants in 1949. Now 30 million Protestants, 30 times, right?
Protestants 30.
No, Protestant increase.
From 3 to 30, 10 times.
No, from 1949 is 1 million. Now it's 30 million.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that working on these big numbers sometimes it's hard, especially when you think in Chinese terms. We group the zeros in a different way, so it makes the conversion complicated. So here is our assessment. The core set of believers, maybe the 33.5 are really clearly Christians. Then expanding, but also perhaps less religious in a sense. So there are believers, and then there are experimental believers or seekers. They try out whether Christianity would work. When some people get sick, says, oh, if you pray, you could get healed. Then they may try to, experiment. And then if they get healed, they may become Christian. I think not only the number increased, but also the social groups have become much diversified. Up to the end of 1980s, most of the Christian growth has happened in the rural areas among the peasant farmers. And those people tend to be older, female, and less educated. Actually, these have become the stereotype of Christians. Sando, there are more older people, more females, and more illiterate. And until today, actually in a book released last August by the CAS, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, still stick to this portrait of Christians as Sando, and plus the Forsto mostly are in the rural areas. But our analysis shows it's not true anymore. The Christians are not older than the general population, not more rural than the general population, not less educated than the general population, with only one there are more, that's more females in the church. And that's not unusual in the Christian history, especially the early Christian history. There are more female Christians. And then a very interesting development in the after 1989 was the rise of so-called cultural Christians in the 1990s. That's a group of scholars, university scholars, who did not necessarily become Christian, but they teach about Christianity, translate Christian books, and give lectures about the Christian culture. But the more we get to know these people, the more we realize many of them have indeed become Christian converts. Then also in the 1990s, when the market economy really took off in China, and there arose this boss Christians, these business people, especially like on the coastal areas. One example is Wenzhou in Zhejiang province. That's one of the fast developed areas. And Christianity also grew very fast there. Wenzhou is considered some people call it the Jerusalem in China, or Chinese Jerusalem. When I visited Wenzhou in 2002 or 3, people told me there at least 10% of the population were Christian. But among the entrepreneurs, there could be even a higher proportion. So these boss Christians, they are not less educated, poor, rural, but really quite urban or middle class. And then in the last 10 years, there are many returnees, 海归, those who studied abroad or lived abroad for a few years and returned to work to live. And many of them became Christian when they were abroad. So they have formed their own fellowship groups in the big cities. And some of you who watch China closely, you may have seen some news report about Christian lawyers or lawyers who are Christian. This is totally new phenomena. Only became known perhaps around 2005, and when some lawyers really made argued some cases for religious freedom for marginalized people who lost their jobs, lost their houses. This rise of Christian lawyer groups. I think that's a very interesting development. These lawyers were not Christian long ago. Many of them became lawyers first. Then they became Christian. I wondered what happened to them. Why? Well, when you think about what kind of religious convictions, beliefs could support lawyers to fight against inequality, injustice, it seems that at least to these people, the civil rights lawyers, Christianity provide a foundation or provide an anchorage for them to stand strong on their stand strong and defend these marginalized people. Then in the last 2 or 3 years, I discovered a whole new group of people. These are painters, artists. They are Christian. Again, these tend to be artists first, then converted to Christianity. Especially last summer, after our summer institute, I visited a studio and began to realize there's about 200 Christian artists in China today, active painters, sculpture, and those fine arts. So just make a quick point. When I did a study 11 years ago at a southern city to see the age of people who convert, just trying to make the point that not only older people who convert, it's really people in their 20s, people in their 30s, about half of the new converts. If you count those in their 40s, then that's a vast majority. As I myself got into the 40s, I feel still young. So the converts are young people, middle-aged people, not just older people. And on the ground, visit places, you will see all kinds of young people going to church. This is in Beijing at one Christmas Eve. People standing in very cold, windy winter for 2 or 3 hours in order to get into the church. Well, some people brush this off, says, oh, they are curious about this Western culture. They are not serious Christian. Well, it's true, but they could stand in this cold winter for 2 or 3 hours in order to get into it, to see it. See what? Christian worship. Many of them end up become Christian. This is another Christian celebration, Christmas celebration at a underground church, or what's so-called house church. As you can see, it's not at anyone's home. It's in a big hall in a hotel. They rented this place, had this Christmas gathering, celebration. And this is not only one, actually that church organized a series of this kind of gatherings around Christmas time for different people. This is in a Three Self church. If you could see, you can tell it's not all older people, but young, middle-aged people. It's true, a lot of females, 70% or more are females. This is in southwestern China, in a mountainous city. When I visited, it's easily gathered more than a dozen young people, young professionals, because I was there to interview them. So the pastor made a round of phone calls. Those people came on that day. This is in Wenzhou. The Basque Christians gathered around Christmas time when they returned from other places in China, returned home to Wenzhou. And they had a big celebration at a hotel. This is above ground, not underground. But not that different from the underground church in Beijing celebrating at a hotel. So now this question. Why do young people convert to Christianity? I had an article published called Lost in the Market, Saved at McDonald's. When I was interviewing them, many of them, when we say, on the phone says, I like to interview you, where should we go? They don't like people to go to their homes or other places. Very often says, oh, there is a McDonald's, let's meet there. Several times the interviewees picked McDonald's. Not only for the interview, actually they had Bible study at McDonald's. They had a Timothy training course. That's, I think, 12 or 13 lessons. Each lesson would take one time. So 1 week, a lesson. So 12 or 13 weeks, someone would pass from knowing nothing about Christianity to become an evangelist. And where do they do that? Well, they do that at a McDonald's. they would have the lesson 1 at one table, lesson 2 another table. There would be 12 tables or 13 tables. There are 12 or 24 leaders lead each lesson. And they just go there, buy a drink. The table belongs to them for that period of time. And they had this Bible study at a restaurant, at a McDonald's restaurant in that city for a long time. Then eventually caught the attention of the police because according to the regulations, it's illegal to do anything religious outside a religious site. So this would be considered illegal. Eventually the police rounded them up and made them to confess they did something wrong and would promise never do that again. So after midnight, the leaders only stayed there, and they first refused to sign any form of confession, but eventually they realized they have to do something. So they finally consented and wrote down, says, I promise we will not meet for Bible study at this McDonald's. And there are 24 McDonald's in that city. And also there are Kentucky Fried Chicken or Chinese tea houses who could function the same. So anyway, so I had a whole article on that saved at the McDonald's thing. About why Christianity seems to be growing faster than other religions, except the folk religion that's really coming back very quickly. Buddhism also grows fast, but there are some issues. Overall, Christianity, I still think, is a good reason to say grows the fastest in terms of institutional religion. Then how do we explain that Christianity grow in the last 60 years, especially the last 30 years, but not before that? Why Christianity thrived today in China, not 50 years ago or 60 years ago? I have heard those theological arguments. You know, if you go to churches, pastors likes to tell you, oh, this is God's plan, God's time. So who we are to, to even ask that question. But that's a theological, perhaps, a theological explanation. Then I also talked to many government officials and scholars in China who are more aligned with official ideology. They think this is all ideology, as Western hostile forces using Christianity to subvert the Communist Party. Actually, since 1995, the regulations target this Western infiltration through the church. And actually, yesterday I read a news in Mongolia, in Inner Mongolia, Chinese Mongolia, in northeastern China, someone sneaked in, brought 65 copies of Bible across the border, and they were arrested. Because this is as evidence of this Western infiltration through Christianity. They have ultra motive to overthrow the Chinese communist rule. And for those who are less ideological, I do encounter many intellectuals in China, scholars, who may not like the communist ideology, but they are suspicious of Christian growth for cultural reasons. They think this is still part of the cultural imperialism that continues today. They come to destroy Chinese culture. There are also many popular speculations about the growth of Christianity. There's, oh, now in the countryside, the barefoot doctors all kind of disappeared. There's a lack of health care system. When people get sick, they go to church, they pray to God, get healed, and become Christian. That does, if you hear stories, you do hear a lot of those stories. But the problem is, actually, in the 1980s and the 1990s, many people also became practitioners of Qigong for the healing power, because Qigong was effective in many ways, but not many people stick to Qigong. And Buddhist temples or monks also could perform some miracles that heal people, but not many stick to a particular Buddhist temple. As the Christians do harvest those who got sick, got problems, and they stay in the church. That made Christianity different from other religions. But that speculation is a lot. I want to offer a sociological explanation. It's not because of the healing power of the supernatural. It's really once you become part of the church, the fellowship, you are hooked into the social network. The social support sometimes can sustain people who experience life problems, family breaking down, or some people get sick, and this prayer support, not necessarily healing itself, but this social support perhaps explain more about the Christian growth than other factors. And I want, in my next book project, what I really try to argue is that Christianity grow is because Christianity in China today is perceived compatible with modernity. And modernization is what the Chinese have been trying to pursue in the last 2 centuries. More than 1.5 centuries now. Beginning in 1840, when China was defeated, China wanted to modernize. And now Christianity is compatible. And this modernization is a big topic in sociology of religion. Modernization would lead to secularization. People may lose faith. Now, after several decades of debate, there are different views, different paradigms. Jose Casanova is a major player in that debate. Here, I'm not trying to make that argument about it. It's really, I'm seeing that modernization can be broken down to different aspects. Industrialization, urbanization, this mass education, market economy. Why do you produce? Produce in order to sell, instead of the agrarian economy you produce for yourself. This market economy is part of this modernization. And also constitutional democracy, democratization as part of modernization. Those sub-processes of modernization seems to, first of all, create the need for some spiritual answers for the individuals. And when the individuals seek for some answers for their existential questions in this modernization or the sub-processes, they find that Christianity provides the answer that they need. I'll try to get more specific. Adopting market economy, why would market economy favors the growth of Christianity instead of other religion? Max Weber, the sociologist, the founding father of sociology, one of the founding fathers, he argued that there's an affinity between the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. Even though there are all kinds of debates about it, some people don't believe it, but when I did my first empirical project in China was on Christian ethics. When we interviewed those entrepreneurs, Christian entrepreneurs, it shows that for them, Christianity provided the ethical principles and also faith to hold them onto this market economy. Market economy is not a preferred way of life because it's full of risks. You have to take risks in order to survive. If you do not swim hard, you can sink quickly. But in the old planned economy, you don't have to make that kind of effort. because the state takes care of everything from cradle to grave. But the market economy created a lot of uncertainties. People, those Christians, those converts, find the kind of support that they needed for their life, for their business. And then just quickly about this constitutional democracy. China was the first republic in Asia. When Sun Zhongshan, who is the founding father of the Republic of China, founded the new republic, he really very much modeled on the US Constitution more than any other models at that time. And Sun Zhongshan happened to be a Christian. And some of the active leaders of the Republic Revolution, were Christian. So the blueprints of the Constitution really came from the U.S. model, and especially for those who have some Christian faith. Dr. Liu Yi works on studies that period of the debates on the constitutional rights, religious freedom. Very interesting. That chapter will be in the book that I'm editing. But anyway, this democracy idea in China really, especially in the early decades, promoted a lot by Christians. Then the organizational form, that's not from the classic theorists. During the Cultural Revolution and before, Chinese society was organized into two kinds of social institutions. In the cities, urban areas, they were organized into called the danwei, the work unit. Each work unit is like a is a total society, a totalitarian society. The work unit takes care of everything, from housing to child care to health care, everything. And in the rural areas, the villagers were organized into communes, the communist communes, the same function. That could function well at that time, but now with market transition, now danwei is losing functions, social functions, socializing certain social functions, and the commune was dissolved in the around early 80s. Right? So with this market economy in the reform era, people still need social life. How do they get their life socially organized? The Communist Party is really very much giving up, at least giving out a lot of functions. There's no other forces replacing that. And Christian churches comes in to a certain degree, replacing those roles. And now in the rural areas, the so-called 红白喜事, when there's a wedding, there's a funerals, who organized this? How do you do this? Well, the churches comes in to function, to organize, to keep the village as a community. In the urban areas, now the neighborhood committees perhaps function certain way to put, reinforce some social rules. But during the market transition period, that's all changing, weakening. And the church, the fellowship groups provide some social need that's missing. Temples, Buddhist temples wouldn't function this way, at least traditionally, because temple-based religions are not congregations. It's really you alone with the supernatural, the Buddha, some gods. It's not congregational. The congregational form of community life really provides the social need that few other social institutions in China could function that way. And Christianity functions that way. What time is it?
We should.
Should wrap up? Okay. Um, Actually, I try to, I plan to discuss each category of these Christians in China today to show in what ways they see this compatibility with modernity or modernization. I think the more we look into it, the more I got convinced. I hope I can make convincing points when I write the book. Like in the rural areas, people are not worried that Christianity is a foreign religion anymore. You still hear that kind of rhetoric among intellectuals, especially among government officials. Oh, Christianity is a foreign religion. God, Shangdi, is a foreign god. For those rural villagers, they don't care whether God is a foreign one or not. Actually, I make that argument at least half jokingly. I grew up in a village, lived in the village. At my home, there were those poster pictures, portraits of Karl Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, along with Chairman Mao on the main wall of my house. We stared at those foreign faces for 4 or 5 decades. Now you tell me a foreign face is not, you cannot trust. Now they simply replace the foreign faces with Jesus' face. So for the rural villagers, it doesn't matter to be a foreign religion or not. God seems to be more powerful than those village gods in terms of healing and other things. So this really very much integrated into their life. Then I'll skip all the others. Look at the last group of Christian artists, because I get very excited because I just got to know this group. They are going to do a show, exhibit in New York City in this next month. This called In God We Trust, Contemporary Chinese Christian Art. This Easter revival time. So they collected about a dozen Christian artists' artworks. For these people, if you know about Chinese art at all, Chinese art became quite chaotic in the 20s. There's all kinds of different schools, different not traditions. It's just people are struggling for meaning, maybe a simple way to put it. And then this group of Christians, they find meaning in Christianity. And this gave them inspiration for their creative arts. Okay, now, I know I haven't really articulated that clear enough, but if this is true, if the compatibility between Christianity and modernity is true, then it shows that Christian growth is contingent, it's not inevitable. The Christian growth could be stopped if you try this. Well, advise the government officials, right? And so if you stop the economic reforms, if you give up the political reforms toward constitutional democracy, and if you close out China toward the outside world in this globalizing era, and or you let other traditional Chinese religions to grow, so that not so many people would look to Christianity for their meaning of life. In fact, all these measures have been taken by the government, only to a limited existence, and success is very little. Even perhaps we could see a total failure. All these efforts have failed so far. Thinking about even suppress relentlessly. In the last half a year or a year, I think that's the current strategy. But during the Cultural Revolution, they tried the hardest. But remember, that's the time when Christianity tripled. in a decade. So the more harsh suppression, perhaps the more faster growth of Christianity. Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't you have a seat at the table? We can have a more informal discussion that way. Maybe turn off the projector. You've given us a lot to talk about. We've got a solid half hour or so for discussion. And I'd ask that if you'd like to ask a question, raise your hand. I'll recognize you, and you can briefly introduce yourself and pose a question. We'll see how many questions there are. We'll start one at a time, and we may group some as we go along. So the floor is open. Over here? Yeah. Please speak up because the acoustics aren't that great in this room.
Yeah.
China have the growth of Protestant Christianity in China? First question. Second question, do you have heroes like Watchman Nee and others who provided for the growth of spiritual edification of Christianity in China, which means homegrown religious leaders like Watchman Nee and others heroes? Was the case in communist countries, one and others in Europe. So these are the two questions. Is Spain a vacuum, and then, and in particular among educated?
Okay. Yeah, thank you for this very interesting question. About whether communism has helped the growth of Christianity. Actually, in the last few years, I have heard some Chinese intellectuals who favor traditional Chinese culture make the argument that really the communists introduced Christianity into China. But sociologically speaking, the communists tried so hard to eliminate so-called superstitions. The Cultural Revolution period, not all religions suffered, but the traditional beliefs in the supernatural suffered perhaps the most. And then after you clean up the ground, then the Communist Party retreating from society, there is that empty ground or vacuum. Then Christianity comes in, more or less now is really on the same ground like traditional religion, or even more in some way more has some advantage in that the Christian theology and atheism seems quite close to each other, more so between atheism and polytheism. You know, monotheism, atheism, there's one switch, but switching from polytheism to atheism seems to travel an even bigger distance. So after you clean up the ground with atheism now it's not that hard to move to monotheism. Yeah, there are certainly other ways to argue that.
What about the second question about Christian heroes?
There were many martyrs during the Cultural Revolution. Now people really look very high up to them. In terms of post-1979 development, I think it's perhaps more accurate to say this. There are those nameless evangelists dominant so far. I don't think there has been clearly identified heroes or leaders active today. Yeah, there are many. There are many sectarian or heretical groups in China. There are many Chinese Christs, plural. And some people stand up and says, I'm the second coming of Christ. Follow me. There are many of those sectarian or cultic groups. But in the Christian landscape, overall landscape, I don't think there are clearly identified Christian leaders yet.
Just as a follow-up to that, what about Chinese Christian groups based outside of China? Are they part of this constellation? How do you see that interaction?
Yeah, my first book is on Chinese Christians in America, and then followed with this transnational ties between those in the U.S. and Chinese societies. I see this pretty much integrated already. Actually, during the Cultural Revolution, which group really evangelized, other than the more traditional sectarian groups existed in China? It's really those overseas Chinese secretly returned to their home villages and spread the gospel. And when I got back to China to begin fieldwork research around 2000, the more I talk to people, the more I find that those missionary work have been taken over mostly by overseas Chinese instead of Caucasian, European, or Americans.
Okay.
I think you've made a very compelling argument that Christianity is likely to continue growing. Now, I want you to speculate on the ceiling of the growth. Is the model Japan, Taiwan, Korea? We are here very similar. Taiwan will be the closest. China, culturally, but Japan and Korea, both Confucian Buddhist. Japan relatively low level, Korea over 1/3. Or because of the atheist clearing up of the brasses, do you think that the ceiling is even higher, let's say, in China than in Korea?
Yeah, I think that's a really multi-million question. We need a comparative project to find out. My current speculation is certainly China is not closer to Japan. In Japan, Christians account for about 1%. In Taiwan, perhaps 5%, depends. And then Hong Kong, a little bit higher, perhaps 10%. What's interesting is Singapore. The majority of the Singaporeans are Chinese. Among the Singaporean Chinese, perhaps 18, 20, or even 25% are Christian, especially among the more educated professionals, doctors, lawyers, accountants, tend to be more Christian among them. Then the higher one is South Koreans. The ceiling, I really don't think that we have seen the ceiling yet. It's really, right now is a faster growth period. I don't know where it will end up to. I think my own speculation is more like South Korea than any other societies. Because one factor is, communism cleared off the ground for the growth of Christianity. And then in terms of global integration, China and Singapore in some way similar. I think the Chinese desire to be global. Mainland Chinese perhaps even more so than the Taiwanese in Taiwan. In Taiwan, the traditional culture is still strong.
Let's see. Let's go to Javier first and then Pete. Yeah.
My name is Javier. I'm an undergraduate here at School of Applied Studies. My
Tough question.
Yeah, this is a tough question. I think, don't think the Chinese government as a homogeneous one unit. It's not. It's a massive government. There are different levels, the central government, the local government, and within the central government there are different departments. They are not homogeneous, not unified, even in terms of religious policy. Actually, part of the reason that religion could grow, even though the Religious Affairs Bureau or the SARA try hard to control, because other departments, other ministries do not agree. They want to grow economy. That's their task. And in order to grow the economy, they welcome investors, no matter what religious background. And then those investors come, bring their religion, and evangelize their employees. And for those commerce, economics ministers, it's fine to them. So those actually Religious Affairs Bureau people are very low in terms of ranking in the government. So that's the part of the reason they fail. They are not really in that powerful position. Then among the officials, are there some Christians? I think very likely. We don't know if they don't tell. We are empiricists. We have to base on empirical evidence to see things. But speculations could say there must be some. Even if they are not baptized Christians, I think it's clearly some are more sympathetic to Christianity than others. Those who would speak in their position whenever possible for Christianity, because they may not necessarily speak for the faith for that purpose, but for Chinese modernization again. You know, China need to be ruled by law, rule of law, and the Chinese need to be more integrated into the bigger world, and then give more freedom to people. They choose Christianity, that's not bad for the government, for the society. You would hear those arguments by some government officials and especially by scholars who are supported by the government. Oh, by the way, the local area, I got to mention this. You know, there are some reports, like in Yunnan province, southwestern China, some county governor would send those people who used to get drunk to churches. So you got to go to church, get rehabilitated. So that happens.
Thank you. Next question, E.
I have two questions. Firstly, about Christianity and modernization. Really, Chinese are very impressed by the left-liberal thesis of Protestant ethics and spiritual capitalism. And in the 1980s, there was a discussion about the relationship between Confucian modernization and East Asian. Just a few years ago, Richard Madison published a new book about the Dharma democracy, about the Taiwan Buddhism, their contribution to modernization in Taiwan. So, can you explain a little more about religion and modernization relationship in China compared to second? The second is about the difference between Catholicism and Protestantism in China. Really, your title is about the Christianity in China, but in your conclusion, really the future is about Protestant. So, and in fact, there's really different situation in China between the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church.
Richard Madison had a book on the democracy's Dharma, mostly on this democratization process of Taiwan and religious roles in that. He highly praised the roles of Buddhism and some Taoist temple. I think it's a good book, it's intriguing, but I think that book ignored the Christian contribution to the democratization process of Taiwan. If you think about this, Taiwan or the Republic of China held onto their constitution tightly. They only suspended the constitution during the martial law period. They never said we shouldn't have constitution. We should, but only we suspend this for, they suspended for 4 decades, 3 or 4 decades. But the people still believed in constitutionalism. And who really played that role? Chiang Kai-shek was a Christian, the president of Republic of China. And then later on, Li Denghui was a Christian. And during the early process of those street movement in the mid-1980s, who went to the street first? Well, like it or not, it's really very much supported, at least the church supported that street movement, descending movement in the 1980s, still when Jiang Jingguo was still alive. And some of the members of the DDP, Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, were Christians, but those are Taiwanese Presbyterian Church. And they were always considered more separatist. So the Chinese mainlanders really disliked them. But really in terms of democratization process of Taiwan, I think the Taiwanese Presbyterian Church played a significant role that Richard Madsen failed to mention. I think that's a big, big gap in that book. I think we need more study of the democratization process of Taiwan in order to have a better understanding of the Christian contribution. The Buddhists really followed suit. Once the democratization process in process, there's a social welfare, social service, public service, charities, and all those really contributed to the democratization process. I think that's no doubt. But the initiation, the really what got things going, I think Christianity played a much bigger role than what has been acknowledged. I hope that's, that's another project I like to do, to study democratization process in Taiwan and also in Korea.
We've taken down.
Oh, you already taken down. But about the Catholic part, actually, I hesitated to talk about this. Georgetown, nevertheless, is still a Catholic university. And actually, based on our survey of 2007, the Catholic population might have shrunk. And that's a terrible finding if it's close to the reality. I already got complaints by some well-known Catholic leaders in the US. Says that couldn't be true because the estimate outside China says there must be about 12 million Catholics in China. That's Richard Madsen also quote that number frequently. That number comes from a Catholic Research Institute based in Hong Kong, and says that would include underground Catholics. The Chinese government said there are about 5 million Catholics. Our survey shows there may be only 3.5 million, even less than the government white paper published in 1997. That's 4 million. We found only 3.5 million. Why? I think there are 3 possible reasons. One is the Chinese Catholics declining. Declining because of the population control. Now there's a one-child policy. The Catholics used to carry on their faith by family. But now you do not have those big families. When the older people passing away, there are not enough younger generation to fill that in. And that's really, China is in that stage in terms of aging of the population. And there are not many new converts. Yeah, there are some converts to the Catholic Church, but not that many. Go to China, almost every university campus you will find some Protestant Bible study group, but not that many Catholic Bible study groups. Because Catholic study used to be only the responsibility of the priests, not the lay people, but the Protestants are lay initiated group. Another reason is that the Catholics are suppressed much severely. The government, there's a confrontation. I wanted to show something is, even the recent incidents of ordaining a Chinese bishop in Chengde. The Pope, the Vatican did not approve. The Chinese government went ahead to make that happen. There's a clear confrontation between the Chinese government and the Vatican, and that made the Catholic growth even more difficult. And because of these harsher measures against the Catholics, I think in our survey, there would be more Catholics fear to reveal their identity. So there could be more than 3.5 million Catholics, but fewer of them were willing to identify themselves.
The sample is also too small.
Huh?
The sample is also too
Yeah, the
small
sample size, yeah, that's,
to pick up the Catholics.
Right.
Too small the number to be picked by the sample.
Yes, that's the third factor. That's Catholics in China tend to be concentrated, like in Hebei province and Fujian province, several provinces more concentrated. When we did the sampling, at that stage was random. So some of the Catholic concentrated areas, maybe by chance they were not picked up. That's another reason. Yeah, but I think it's really several reasons played together have this result.
Very interesting. A question here and then in the back, yes.
Thank you for that presentation. I have a question about the underground systems and technology in China. In your statistics, what is the percentage of the underground systems and what is the percentage of technology? Do you have some kind of solution how to integrate the two into one or how to solve that
Based on the survey, we do not have an estimate of how many people are underground because it's a survey, it's only people admit, and we did not ask them whether they go to an underground church. We did include a question whether they meet at people's home for their religious service. We haven't get into that detailed analysis yet. There may be something we could tell. Overall, in China, the estimate people keep saying there are several times more Protestants in house churches than in the three self-churches. But again, those are really so far only speculations. I have no more to say, the percentage. In terms of integrating them together, the Catholics are trying that. The underground Catholics and above ground Catholics, the Pope initiated some effort, released a pastoral letter, hope they will come together into one church. It's not easy. There are a lot of sociological reasons of not coming together, not theological, but sociological. I will not get into that. For the Protestants, I think the Chinese thinking need to change. The Protestants is not a united group ever. There are so many denominations in the U.S. and even Baptists. Not all Baptists like Baptists. The Southern Baptists would not meet with those American Baptists or the conservative Baptists with American Baptists. Presbyterians, you have the Presbyterian USA, you have the PCA, the Presbyterian Church of America, you have Evangelical Presbyterian Church. Those are separate denominations. They will not even worship together. So I think it's wrong thinking that you have to make all Protestants come in under one roof. It's by nature they have diverse churches. I think it's really, if there is a policy change, is allow Allow people to choose their way instead of forcing them under one roof. When it was forced upon them, what happened is you produce more underground Christians. They simply stop going to the church. They meet at homes. And that's where, when the people meet at homes, they are more likely to develop into cultic or sectarian groups. That's even more divisive. So, yeah.
Here and then here. Yes?
Al Norton, AAB. How influential in the rest of China have you seen the established churches and missions of Hong Kong and the new territories before and after that handover?
Oh, you mean what has happened in Hong Kong after the turnover?
Have you seen that impacting the mainland, the rest of China?
Hong Kong certainly, because of the closeness to mainland, the easy travel, they have had some significant impact on the Christian growth in China. But I haven't seen a growing impact since 1997. 97, yeah, the turnover. Actually, after the change, some institutions that used to be based in Hong Kong moved away because they fear that the unification would have some negative impact on their activities. They moved away. They moved to Hong Kong, or no, moved to Taiwan, or moved to Singapore. Once they move away, their influence actually declines. I have some specific organizations that can, illustrate this. When they moved to Taiwan, their influence simply quickly declined. And the other groups who were not really doing active missions in mainland China, they still cannot do much because the Chinese government has repeated that, this is two systems, one country, two systems. So Hong Kong, you maintain yours, but you stay there. People try, but I don't see really significant increase of impacts of Hong Kong Christians.
So I have one more question here, and then we have time for maybe one more after that. Yes, there, and then here, and we'll wrap up. Please. Yeah.
In the last 10 years, especially in the last 6 years, there is a strong movement to revive Confucianism. And among those Confucian revivalists that I have met, they do hold a strong sentiment against Christianity. So in their eyes, Christianity is still a foreign religion that's not compatible with Confucianism. But that's really more of a sentimental position instead of a rational, I think that's a difficult word. Yeah, right. And because when I studied Chinese Christians in America, in that book, I showed in the whole chapter to see those Chinese Christians, how do they perceive traditional culture? They see compatible. They see Confucian morality as very compatible with evangelical Christianity, not contradictory to each other. Actually, the more I dialogue with those Confucian revivalists in China, the more they also see, well, may not be that contradictory to each other. There are something similar. maybe Confucian believers need to learn from Christians, especially the spirit of evangelizing. So there's a sentimental position versus when they really use their reasoning. So I think it's really hard to struggle among those people, those intellectuals.
That's the final question. Yeah.
Two quick questions.
Why don't you introduce yourself? Yeah.
My name is Martin McGee. I'm in the MSFS school. My first question, typically when China absorbs whether it be technology or social tenets from other cultures, there seems to be kind of a shift that makes it its own, makes it Chinese, something with Chinese qualities in a sense. In terms of practice, the conduct of service and the idea of tithing and those type of things, have you witnessed any practices that are unique to Chinese culture and the kind of fight to kind of merge the two, Chinese culture and Christian principles? And the second question is, do you feel that Chinese churches identify with more international issues related to the Christian faith? So the topic of Israel, for instance, is that something that you've gotten any indication of a connection, people feel a connection?
Okay, in terms of the Chinese characteristics of Christianity, that's the Chinese phrase, like to make everything Chinese characterized. First of all, they speak Chinese. But to a deeper level, I see actually, first of all, Christianity is a universal religion. But a universal religion comes to a particular culture always as inculturation or become cultural. I don't know how to say this. Culturalized. Go native. Yeah. Other than those on the surface, what people eat, what people do, what do people say, there's deeper level theological creation or theological integration. This is actually in my first book. I even talked about this. I see there are Chinese Christians actually means perhaps separate what does that mean to be Chinese. I see a lot of Chinese Christians are really Confucian Christians. They are very much Confucian in their emphasis of education, the family life, and community cohesiveness. And then there are also Taoist Christian. Chinese Christian means Taoist Christian. The Taoist, likes this, more shamanist, more direct communication with God, unity with God, spiritual, charismatic Christians, more likely to be Taoist Christians. Then there are also, I would say, Buddhist Christian, but there's two kinds. In China, the Buddhism are two major traditions it later developed. Those are Pure Land Buddhism and the Chan or Zen Buddhism. The Pure Land Buddhism is relying on the Buddha to save you with elaborate rituals, elaborate buildings, decorations. Yeah, I saw that the Catholics tend to be that kind of Chinese Christian. And then there are also those Zen Buddhist, Zen Christian or Chan Christian. There was a famous Chinese intellectual who became Christian. He has nothing to do with Buddhism, but I thought he was more like a Chan or Zen Christian. Liu Xiaofeng, I don't know, anyone knows? He basically says, you don't have to read the Bible every day. You can be a Christian. You don't have to believe every part of the Bible. You can be a Christian. You can even, just the Zen Buddhist, being Buddhist, like that. They tend to be outside of the institutional church, more freelance of that type. So theological level, I see this kind of integration or creation still at the very early stage. I think in the next 2 decades, perhaps, perhaps, you would see some new Chinese theologians work out some theological work that would even fascinate non-Chinese Christians. So far, the Chinese have been really borrowing theologies from Europeans and perhaps also Americans. But I think in the next few decades, you will see some Chinese theologians whose theology would be appealing to non-Chinese as well.
Second question about the international imagine, the global
Oh.
imagine Christian community.
What I can say about that? Actually, first of all, most Chinese had very little idea about Israel because the relationship were not restored until very late, recently. But I just some interesting anecdotes. I met a man in China who is in Hunan province. He just became fascinated by Israel or by the Jewish people. So he had no contact with any real Jew, and then he developed a whole website to introduce the Jewish culture. And then I met him, then he came. Yeah, it's very interesting. He just fascinated. This is so interesting people, so interesting culture. Then there are several Jewish institutes, Jewish studies institute developed in China. I met a Jewish rabbi in China teaching at a university in China. He held Sabbath at his apartment with Chinese chanting Jewish, chanting. I had a very good conversation with him. He said, you know, there are some Chinese seriously interested in Judaism, converting to Judaism. Actually, he is used to be a Hasidim rabbi. You know, they do not convert people. But he went to China to convert the Chinese to Judaism. And he said, for those who really showed interest in Judaism, I sent them to Christian churches to learn about monotheism. Yeah, that's, I guess, I don't know whether this put together making any sense. For those, for those actually in the church, evangelical Christians, you know, similar to other evangelical Christians in the U.S., they do consider Israel or the people, the Jewish people, have a special position in God's salvation. God's plan of salvation. They are special, even though the Jews experienced so many problems, but they are still somehow stand in a priority in the last days. I think you would hear that often among the Chinese Christian groups, both here and also in China.
Well, this topic of Christianity in China is really endlessly fascinating and very important, and it will grow even more important. I'm delighted that the conversation brought out so many interesting questions that we'll be able to pursue here at Georgetown, and I know that we'll be engaging you in the years to come. So thanks again for being here, and please join me in thanking Dr. Yang for his visit.
Thank you for all your excellent questions.
Yeah, very good.